The wind blew in 10 people on a boat. The water grew thick with undulating white forms as they neared their destination. The sky above was overcast. A dry grey mist had fallen around and seemed to have drawn in the horizon, encompassing them on all sides. The wind whipped up, trying to coax the lifeless forms out of the water. The forms refused to deviate from their inevitable path, following only the swell and cut of the waves which gathered and dropped like a falling stone snatched out of the sky. The girl and her family huddled closer together. At the head of the boat, one of the people paddled onward, following a battered compass directing them south. The current grew more fearsome as they progressed, and they saw more and more of the white forms. Some of them were pierced and intertwined with pieces of emerald green netting. The girl realised now they were a toxic admixture of plastic bags and jellyfish, bodies perversely tangled as they bobbed ominously along. She cuddled closer to the woman next to her, who sheltered her with a section of tarpaulin as the rain began to plummet down. Their collective mind focused only on the destination. Starved, dehydrated and tired, it set its thoughts on the island. The people on the little boat had been told this place was a paradise, a civilized utopia of peace and serenity. It would house them, shield them from the growing war, soothe and gradually replace all the disturbing memories that haunted them as they slept. Not a word was spoken. The girl heard someone take a sharp breath. She peered out of the tarpaulin and saw one of the men gazing up at the sky as if he had seen paradise up there, and it was beckoning to him. She followed his gaze. There, ahead, stood a gigantic monolithic structure, reaching up into the heavens and plunging deep into the water, blocking their path. It seemed to be compacted from the same material that floated ominously around them, a poisonous, robust concoction of plastic bags, netting and fugitive jellyfish. The wall loomed over them like a great white god. A decision had to be made. One of the men took the initiative. "I'm going to swim along and see how far this goes," he said. The rest protested. "The current's too strong, the weather is too stormy, we'll lose you." The man wouldn't listen to reason. He was desperate, and he had to find a way through to the island. It was their only chance of safety. To the despair of the others, he slipped out into the water, brushing away bits of plastic, and disappeared into the choking depths. They looked out along the wall's perimeter to see if he would surface, but fog had crept closer and embraced them in its wispy arms. Hours passed, and the storm worsened. The group huddled together under their tarpaulins, the people on the outside of the circle clinging on to the edges of the boat. They didn't think he was coming back now. Either he'd gotten through and decided to continue by himself, or he'd perished down there. The rain pelted them from every angle, reverberating with such force off the surface of the boat that it bounced up and created a microclimate inside the tarp. The upside-down rain tickled the girl's ankles and feet. A woman spoke. "I'm going to dive down and see how far the wall goes. There might be a way we can get under it." Of course this was out of the question. She told them there was no other way. One suggested they paddle along the perimeter, searching for their lost friend and for a gap in the plastic monolith that balanced in front of them. He would come back, they said. If he'd found it, he would have come back. They were tired and weathered and hungry, clinging to the tarpaulin with whitened fingers in the hope that it would somehow conduct their energy and give strength to the weaker members in the centre of the circle. The woman wouldn't hear it. She removed her jacket, placed her hand on the girl's cheek for an instant, and dived into the water. She didn't come back. The wind picked up again. The boat was rocking violently, slamming off the side of the wall. They would have to turn back. The decision was made. The girl nestled further inside the tarpaulin as the others worked to turn the boat around. In the act of turning, a rogue wave crashed diagonally into them, and in a split second, the boat flipped. There were screams. 8 people plummeted into the plastic-filled water, glossy like petrol, and into the deep. The current underneath was a whirling vortex of heavy, oily liquid and bits of netting and dangling limbs. The girl could just make out some of the group in front of her. She tried to grab an arm, but she failed. She was repeatedly dragging into the plastic wall ahead, or was it behind? Like a washing machine, her limbs bowled over and became so entangled that she didn't know which parts of her were arms and which were legs, and whether they were even hers at all. She was young, but she'd known enough hardship to be realistic. She would drown. Her chest tightened as her lungs filled with the foul, life-giving liquid. Suddenly she felt something grab at her ankle. Her consciousness was fading, but she did not recognise the touch as one of her kind. It seized her and with insane force dragged her into the deep. On her way down she saw glimpses of the wall, a mass of plastic bags, netting and jellyfish, and the bodies of her family suspended in it. Divine figures, peaceful at last, intertwined forever. A rush of adrenaline surged through all of them when they found out they were leaving. There was panic and there was worry, and there was the loss that had come before. But as the journey began, there was a rising feeling of hope that this may not be the end. She awoke to stillness. After a moment she remembered what had happened, and the familiar feeling of loss fell over her. Her arms cradled her knees as she hovered delicately above the soft sand. She was underwater, and she was breathing. She wondered if she was still alive. The water was gloomy. Fragments of light refracted through the jagged current, creating the illusion of slowly rising dust in an old empty room she thought she'd forgotten. The ocean was vast but empty. She knew that only a few plants and animals remained, and it had been that way for years now. Bleached coral, jellyfish. Yet looking up now, something very alive floated ahead of her. Larger than her, the size and vague shape of an adult human, but with warped features. Sallow skin, stripped of pigmentation, turned scaly with age or disease. A skull in between that of a hammerhead shark and a human being. A jagged spine protruded from its back, stretching the skin so much that it had begun to tear. The eyes were a dusky white, the kind of white that every colour that was once bright fades into. She should have been frightened, but she'd already lost everything she could stand to lose. The creature had an air of peace, of quiet curiosity. "Who are you?" she tried to ask. But the words came out in gentle, oily bubbles that rose slowly to the surface and were gone. The creature tilted its head to examine her. The girl broke her gaze as the shadow of loss swooped low over her once more. Her family was gone. They would never reach the island together. The island which was paradise, which would bring safety and harmony, was out of their reach. She thought of them there, suspended in the wall of plastic, so close to paradise, stuck in purgatory or worse. Her tears drifted away as soon as they appeared, tangled with the words she could not speak. Tiny sky lanterns floating perpetually upwards. Was the creature aware of her distress? She burrowed further into her knees, overcome with the sense that she'd never gain back what she'd lost. The one thing that she knew was that she had to get through that wall somehow. She couldn't allow their journey to be a failure. She had to reach the island. She looked up at the unknown creature with puffy eyes and pointed towards the wall. "I have to get through," she said with her eyes. I need to get through to the island. Help me." The creature looked at her with those sad, clouded eyes and shook its head. The girl's expression was pleading, but she didn't have the energy to fight. She collapsed her head back into her hands. The creature moved towards her slowly and gestured at her to look its way. Slowly she raised her head. The strange being floated backwards and pointed with long webbed fingers to the surface. In a gentle flowing motion it gestured forward with an index finger, and from the tip emerged a swirling thread of light that looped over itself and travelled sidewinding onto the canvas of dusky blue. There, before the girl's very eyes, it became a fish, a bluefin tuna with twinkling scales traversing the water around her. The creature lifted the other hand, and from there emerged a turtle, huge, bioluminescent, outlined with glimmering light. The girl ceased her crying and took in the immense glow emanating from the vision around her. Dancing before her eyes was a glorious parade of marine life, animals that she'd only ever seen in history books. A silvery dolphin playfully twirled through the water, lighting it up as schools of fish darted here and there, the large ones begrudgingly shuffling along to make way. Glowing hammerhead sharks skirted the sandy surface. One passed right below her, and she felt the light gently warm the pads of her weary feet. She looked at the creature as the magic danced from its fingertips. Through those pale, clouded eyes she saw a human expression, one of empathy and sadness. It slowly floated towards her and gently placed a webbed hand on her shoulder as the lit-up creatures began to fade. Feeling under some sort of spell, she took a deep breath. The sensation was unhuman, ritualistic. She inhaled, but no water entered her mouth and nostrils. Instead, her whole body respired, borrowing energy from the space around her, as if the force of every being that once resided there had returned to fill her lungs. She leaned into the creature's arm. She felt a warmth there, something familiar, the universal touch of a mother or the sight of home after a long journey away, concentrated in the skin of that obscure being. Watching the last dying flickers of light, she drifted into a peaceful sleep. The next night the bombs fell. The girl had awoken not knowing what time it was, with the blackened water above her never changing. The creature had offered her some old oily seaweed to eat, but she could barely chew through it. The girl's emotions had slowly crept back to her, causing her muscles to ache. She lay on her back, looking up at the ocean above, wondering where the surface was, and whether the clouds would one day break to reveal a clear and sunny sky, or whether they were condemned to exist under a canopy of dust, smoke and rotten air. She heard a low rumble above her. The creature stood near, looking upwards. A light flicked on above and shone down, penetrating the surface and bathing girl and monster in a soft spotlight. Then above erupted a series of fireworks, gleaming burnt orange, a bouquet of tiny exploding fragments. How beautiful they were, she thought, viewed from down here. She remembered how they looked up on the earth, a roaring hiss of gas and flame igniting and destroying all around it. Now they were silent and gorgeous, exploding into nothing, dispersing and realigning the dust. The creature looked troubled. She looked into its eyes and could see something was wrong. With both webbed hands it gripped her shoulders and looked at her with those cold, cloudy eyes. With salty tears beginning to form, it pointed upwards. "It's not safe anymore. They followed you here." The bombs became heavier and more frequent. The water above them lit up in an orange halo of exploding debris and unsettled dust. The creature pulled the girl close and slowly raised its arms above its head, white light flickering from its webbed fingers. Energy began to build from those sinewy limbs, and a great ball of light appeared in the distance, pale pink intertwined with dark purples and greens, like an immense ball of petrol. Gigantic and imposing, yet silent and serene, it drifted towards them. As it got closer, the girl's eyes adjusted to the light, and she saw that it was a jellyfish, opaque and pink with pearlescent strands of lilac mapping out lines like veins in the vast umbrella of its body. A few wispy legs dangled from it, the ends of which glowed luminescent. Unknown organs illuminated its body from the inside like fairy lights. The creature beckoned towards the girl, taking up a leg of the jellyfish with its other hand. She was tentative. She didn't want to touch it. A fragment of burnt matter landed right next to her, and the creature grabbed at her, pulling her inside the giant umbrella. The beast cloaked them both in an opaque shield of pink. The creature and her were side by side, holding gently onto a strand as the jellyfish began to move away. The two of them nestled inside with their arms stretched slightly ahead, holding on like a scuba diver might hold a camera. They headed straight for the wall. With the subtle twitch of the creature's hands, it led the jellyfish onwards through the black depths. As they approached, the water grew thick with plastic and other, smaller jellyfish that blended in with it. It was hard to tell where the wall began, whether it was a wall or whether it was a brand new atmosphere, now that the worlds of the girl and creature had been laid to waste and forgotten. The beast they sheltered within, though elegant, was sturdy. The creature encouraged it onwards, and to the girl's shock they began to burrow deep into the wall. She tried not to think of the people stuck above them, in the prison of netting and lost creatures. The burrowing of the beast created a vortex around them. The jellyfish emanated a burning white light as the wall parted for them, and they drifted through. She saw the names of familiar brands, and broken parts of old things, and toys all caught up in netting which tied the whole thing together, bursting at the seams like a hunk of meat tied up with butcher's string. The beast began to accelerate, and the travellers with it. The girl took a hold of the creature's hands and felt that familiarity again. Not the feeling of a person she'd known, but the feeling of a person, of safety, a protective big brother, a day by the coast building sandcastles. The creature placed a webbed hand on her head and bowed its own as the swirling plastic went faster and faster by and they went hurtling into the abyss. The girl gripped onto that feeling, the nostalgia for something she'd never had, someone else's memories. You used to be someone. The girl woke up on a beach. Groggily she heaved herself up off the sand. The creature was nowhere to be seen. She remembered travelling through the swirling cave and everything going black. She rubbed her eyes and looked around her. The beach was littered with paper. Inland was shielded with the old dead forest, but she could make out a clearing just up a small hill. The town must lie ahead. Paradise. She turned and looked out to sea. Waves lapped the beach, almost a natural colour. Further out the water thickened with floating parts, and on the horizon a looming wall of plastic bags and netting. She was past that now. This was the place. Perhaps Utopia fell within the barricade of the sand. Perhaps Utopia fell within the barricade of the sand. The beach was still no man's land. Her legs wobbled as she took a step. She thought after a long time underwater it would feel good to breathe outside again, but the air was stale and unsatisfying. She began to walk towards the town. On her path through some old dead undergrowth, she saw more littered paper, newspaper cuttings. She carefully lifted one up. It was dated 3 months ago. It wasn't written in her language, but it was one she understood. Oceanic Wall is a success. She looked at it, and looked back out at the ocean she'd left, seeing the looming structure on the horizon. Success. She saw no signs of life, human or otherwise. As she approached the town, a few insects scattered across her path. She noticed her shoes were dry. The capital city. The town sprawled ahead. A sorry outline. Dilapidated buildings heaving in the breeze like a fallen bison. She stood in a clearing on a hill, observing the paradise her family had sought. What she saw was sadder than ashes. Tears welled in her eyes as she stepped into the ghost town. There was no one here. She could feel the absence in the atmosphere. There were no animals. The trees were dead. She wandered the streets for a while, trying to interpret the abandoned signs of shops and hotels and restaurants. There was an old clothing shop on the corner, dresses still draped over tiny, perfect mannequins. The windows glazed over with dust. She passed it and turned onto the next street. Her eyes immediately jumped to something lying on the ground. It was only a bit smaller than her, human-like, draped in a grey blanket, stiff, lifeless. She stopped dead and stared for a few seconds. An overwhelming wall of sound blared between her ears, her mind spinning back on itself, panicking, screaming at her. She turned on her heels and ran, back up the valley to the clearing, and back down again through the piles of paper cuttings and the old dying undergrowth, and back to the beach. Evening was falling, and the breeze had died down. She dived down into the sand and gazed out into the ocean, the wall ahead blurring into obscurity as the sun dipped, the bags and nettings bubbling gently in the distance. The silence. She sat and set her eyes on the parts where the water was still twinkling, and gentle waves rocked to and fro. She thought about the tuna, and the turtle, and the dolphin and the hammerhead sharks, the sardines, the bright orange clownfish, the octopus, the jellyfish. She took a deep breath and waited. If she just waited long enough, she thought, she might see a glimmer of light on the oily water, sounding her return.